The Second Nun's Priest Tale is a saint's life or hagiography, or as it was described back in the Miller's Tale, a legend and a life. And it's presented as usual as a translation. I have here done my faithful business. After the legend in translation, write of thy glorious leap and passion, thou with thy garland wrought with rose and lilia, thee mean I made and mother, Cecilia. This story of Saint Cecilia is based on a famous Latin work called The Golden Legend. And it's filled with incredible stories about saints, and it's still in print to this day. In fact, it was recently retranslated a couple of years ago. And being that it's a book filled with saints, and this is also a story about a saint, it's fitting and dignified that it be written in the rhyme royale, just like the Prior's Tale. This complex stanza emphasizes the textual nature of the work. Now remember, the Middle Ages, at least as it's related to literature, is a textual society. Literacy is high. Writers are more educated than even our writers. The society is organized around writing. The reason why Sertopus is so funny is how unsophisticated that storytelling is, because Sertopus reflects oral society, and oral societies have to deal with memorization, right? That's why they're more prone to taglines like Sertopus's "listen" and formula to aid memory. A textual society focuses on what is being written down. It's visual. And of course, that does not contradict this idea that I've told you before, that reading in the Middle Ages can also mean listening to someone reading to you in the Middle Ages, right? So in other words, audible is a completely acceptable means of reading. Now, in the case of the Golden Legend, each saint's life begins with a poetic etymology. Let me give you an example of how this works. You've already met poetic etymologies when Melody is described as having his name honey and hence is susceptible to sweet discourses. This is how Saint Cecilia is presented in the Golden Legend. The name Cecilia may come from, okay, now pay attention to this, to the way the textual surface changes, how we're looking for the fruit and not the chaff, how the letter has to be interpreted, right? How the textual surface will reveal meanings that go beyond the letter. That's the fruit, right? So this is important. The name Cecilia may come from Coeli Lilia, lilies of heaven. That should remind you of Mary. Or from Caesitate Carens, to be without blindness. Or from Caesis Via, road for the blind. Are you seeing how the words are moving around and creating new meanings? You turn the letters that I've shown you already on the screen, and you can see as the letters move around, they change meanings to this word Cecilia, right? That theme of blindness, that's talking about being able to see. And doesn't she, Cecilia, have to lead her husbands towards the path of sight, which allows them to see the angel? Now, the Golden Legend, by the way, calls her lover, the angel her lover. But notice also how the letters can determine the narrative path. Let's continue with the Golden Legend. Or from Coelum, that's sky or heaven, and Lila, a woman who works from heaven, or the name may be derived from coelum, woman, and laus, people. So let's look at Chaucer's version. Here there's great emphasis on the importance of good works, which is obviously understandable since this is still the Catholic period, as opposed to the gifts of grace that are emphasized in the Protestant church. It begins with an invocatio to Mary that's all about works. And for that faith is dead withouten works, so for to work and give me wit and space. And so his work, writing this text, becomes important. Not so much good works, but writing a good work. Rhetoric then becomes a spiritual activity. Get pray I you that read and that I write. I hope for you who read what I write, forgive me that I do no diligence, right? That I'm not hard worker. This ilk story subtly to indite. Like I don't compose of a subtle work, right? A clever work. For both have I the words and sentence of him that at the saints' reverence the story wrought. I'm dependent on that author who wrote the Golden Legend, and following their legend, I pray you that you will my work amend. In other words, correct any flaws. And to show you how to do a legend or life or hagiography or saints' lives, he'll begin naturally with etymologies. First would I the name of Saint Cecilia expound, as men may in their story see ya. I'm going to expound on it, the name. I'm going to interpret the name for you. He's talking about his translation of the story, his source in the legend. If you can read Latin, we saw the same thing in the general prologue, didn't we? When he quotes Boethius but pretends it's Plato. Whoso can him read? Dittos with the Knight's Tale regarding Statius. So we have to trust his Latin like you have to trust mine. It is to say in English, heaviness lilia, for pure chasteness of virginité, or for she whiteness had of honesté, and green of conscience and of good fame, the sweet savour, Lilia was her name, the sweet taste of her name. I love that. He moves down from the flower's petals to its leaves and stalks, just like the way Geoffrey von Soff would have you do it. But it also reminds you of the beginning of the general prologue, doesn't it? Where it begins with the skies and goes down to the roots, to which he adds an interpretation. Remember, the Middle Ages are all about the fruit, not the husk. They're all about the meaning, not the letter. Or Cecilia's to say the way to blind, for she example was by good teaching. Or else Cecile, as I written find, is joined by a manner conjoining of heaven and Leah, and here in figuring, like turning into an allegory, the heaven is set for thought of holiness, and Leah for her lasting busyness. And then Chaucer begins to add more and more. This is his art of digression or digressio. Activities. Cecile may eke be said in this manner, wanting of blindness, lacking blindness for her great light, or of sapience, wisdom, and for her thew is clear, or else lo, this maiden's name bright of heaven and Laos cometh, for which by right men might her well the heavens of people call, example of good and wise works all. For Laos, peuple, in English is to say, and right as men may in the heavens see the sun and moon and stars every way, right so men ghostly in this maid fray, saying of faith the magnanimité, and eke the clearness whole of sapience, and sundry work is breath of excellence. He brings in science to initiate his own interpretation, based on a planetary theory of the philosopher. That's Aristotle or Ptolemy. And then This amplification is Chaucer at his finest. And right so as these philosophers write, that heaven is swift and round and eke burning, right so was fair Cecilia the wheat, full swift and busy ever in good working, and round and whole and good persevering, and brenning ever in charite volbrichte. Now have I you declared what she hichte. Now I've declared to you what she is named, the meanings of her name. This etymological reading of the text is also a guide for you on how to read the narrative. So in a way, it kind of functions like a true prologue. It gives a path for the narration, how to read a saint's life, just like in the Golden Legend. It lays out all the points. And what about the story? Saint Cecilia and her husband, Valerian. Well, he wants to sleep with her. And in the Latin prose of the Golden Legend, she tells him that she has a spiritual lover, an angel. Here it's more straightforward. I have an angel which that loveth me, that with great love whereso I wake or sleep, is ready I always my body for to keep. This angel guards her body. And if he may feelen out of dread that ye may touch or love in villainy, he right anon will slay you with the deed. If you touch me at all, he will kill you in the act. What are we supposed to think about this? I mean, we didn't see any angel. We're not privy to all of the material. And we also know how desperate girls can be in keeping their virginity from the physician's tale. And her story is about preserving her virginity. And we also saw what happened when Emily praised Diana about preserving her virginity. And of course, we also know that husbands are dumb, right? Is this angel a lie in the style of Pluto's wife, giving the sufficient answer in the Merchant's Tale, or the willful blindness of the Miller's character, or even January for that matter, or the merchant in the Shipman's Tale? Do you see how the Canterbury Tales warps the nature of independent texts? How Chaucer has taken a famous story from the Golden Legend, put it inside the Canterbury Tales, and has now forced new questions to be added, entirely formed by those other texts that surround it. This terribly competitive frame that we saw Melleby talk about, or confront at least. And of course, as Prudence tells us, we need to interpret these contradictions in order to understand more fully how a book like the Canterbury Tales works. And we'll get another way of looking at the Canterbury Tales when we look at the Parson's Tale.
Alright guys, don't forget to like and subscribe and ring that notification bell.